Hi guys, and welcome back to the Emily Knits channel. My name is Emily. I am a knitter and crocheter based in the UK, where I live in the north of Nottinghamshire, close to Sherwood Forest with my other half and our two dogs. I have another pattern roundup for you today. So I wouldn't normally do two back to back, and I'm hoping that this will, I say hoping because I haven't filmed the other one yet, but I'm hoping this will be a little additional video in addition to the podcast that I would normally put out this week as an alternate. Every other week here I tend to do a podcast update, so I do that every 2 weeks, and then in between I'll do something a little bit different. I've done pattern roundups, I've done how much can I knit in 24 hours, I've done it was 12, sorry, not 24 hours. I've done my favourite knitting YouTubers, my least worn hand knits, things like that. And last week I did a pattern roundup of cardigan patterns because I'm getting very much into the fall and winter knitting mood, autumn and winter knitting. And a few people asked if it would be possible to look at some patterns that are more summer focused, that are intended to be knit in plant-based yarns, and I thought that was a really good idea. It wasn't something I'd particularly looked at for my first roundup, because first off, it's been really poor weather this summer in the UK, particularly bad even for the UK. I know there's very much the perception that the UK has terrible weather, which we do. But even by UK standards, this summer has been rubbish. So some of the summer stuff has just not really come onto our radars, I don't think at all. But also we live in quite a temperate climate, so it doesn't necessarily always get cold enough that warm enough to need those summer garments. But I realise not everybody lives in the same climate as me. You've got people in the other hemisphere than me that are coming into they're going to be heading into their summer soon. And you know what? Some people just don't want to knit in animal fibres. There we go. Some people want to knit in plant fibres or can't knit in wool for whatever reason. So I thought this was a really interesting thing to look at, and that's what we're going to go through today. I'm not going to waffle too much because I'm very prone to that. I've got 8 patterns to talk through with you today. They are a mix of, some of them are designed in plant-based yarns and intended to be knit in plant-based yarns. A couple of them are more, they're intended to be spring-summer cardigans, although they've been designed in other things. But for those ones, I think A, they would be quite adaptable, and B, in most cases, either the designer has recommended that you could use them in plant-based fibres, or some of the tests or projects on Ravelry have been made in plant-based fibres, so we can see what they look like. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Grab yourself a drink. I have a coffee, as always. It's actually quite early for me. It's about 8:20 in the morning. It's not early for me to get up, but it's early for me to be filming. I normally film later in the day, and I'm trying to get this sorted before work. So I absolutely have a coffee at 8:20 in the morning. Grab something to drink, grab a project if you want to work on one while we talk. I'll apologise in advance as always with pattern roundups. I have a book down here with notes, so if I'm looking down, I'm sorry, I'll try and limit it, but I'm aware that I do quite a lot. And let's rattle through some. So the first one I want to talk about you've probably heard of, or at least you've probably heard of this designer. So the first one I wanted to talk about is the Corran cardigan by Rebecca Clow, who is the Crayabear. Rebecca has a fantastic YouTube channel, and she also designs fully size inclusive patterns. Her reason for getting into designing in the first place was that she was calling for size inclusivity from designers and realised that she should probably try and do it herself before she did that, to check, how hard is it to design a size inclusive pattern. So she has started designing. She has loads of designs now. They're fantastic and they're all size inclusive. The Corran is one of them. So this is a bottom up drop shoulder all over lace cardigan, and this is one of the ones, I'm really sorry, the sun's going to be coming in and out this morning, so apologies if the lighting's a bit difficult. This is one of the ones that actually her sample is knit in a worsted weight yarn. I think it's actually Cascade 220, which is 100% wool. And she's spoken about this on her podcast. She lives in Scotland, so for her that's absolutely fine. That's perfectly, perfectly doable as a spring-summer cardigan, but it is intended to be a more summery cardigan. And there's plenty of people who have knit this in plant-based fibres. She actually says on the project page on Ravelry that her testers used DK worsted and Aran weight yarns that all got gauge, and they used wool, cotton, silk and linen, so quite a mix of fibres there as well. So like I said, this is a worsted weight worsted weight yarn, but everybody's, you know, as long as you can gauge, people have used from DK to Aran weight, and it's a gauge of 14 stitches to 26 rows on 5mm needles, so a fairly large gauge, which you would expect with lace anyway. It comes in sizes 1 to 10, which is the 34 to 64 inch finished bust, and it recommends an ease of 0.75 to 3.5 inches. And it also has short sleeve versions and long sleeve versions. So I think that makes it really, again, I would probably knit a longer sleeve version of this because I could then wear it in the winter as well. But you could knit this in a summer weight, you could knit this in some sort of 100% linen or cotton or something like that. And I think it would really lend itself to that with that lace. So the yardages, for the short sleeve she recommends 476 to 1030 metres, and for the long sleeve 701 to 1303 metres of yarn. So it's actually not too heavy on the yarn either. And I think, you know, there's a reason this has, I think it's got like 800 patterns on Ravelry, projects on Ravelry. There's a reason it's beautiful. And I think it's quite a modern take on an all-over lace cardigan. So this is the first one, the Corran. The second one I wanted to talk about is the Julie cardigan by Elizabeth Margaret, and I really wanted to highlight this designer a little bit. I was really keen to put something from her in here. She's an absolutely fab designer, and I don't see her getting massive amounts of attention. I've never actually yet, and I do say yet, I've never actually yet knit any of her patterns. I have several in my queue. And if you've watched my podcast, you might know I am currently knitting my wedding dress, and I'm knitting the Milides dress by Inez Oliveira of Vertnet. This Elizabeth Margaret has a pattern that was a very, very close second to knitting the Milides, and there was only one reason. The reason I chose the Milides in the end is that it's the Renard silk dress. It has a scoop back, whereas the Milides has a back that covers my bra, so that was the only thing that sort of secured it. But Elizabeth Margaret has some fantastic designs. That was one of them. I came close to knitting her design as my wedding dress, so if that doesn't tell you a lot about the quality and the kind of work that she puts into her patterns, then, you know, I don't know what will. There's a few of hers. There's a beautiful camisole she's got that I really want to knit, and this Julie cardigan is really stunning. So this is a knit flat and seamed piece, which I realise isn't for everybody. But she said this was inspired, it's an all-over lace cardigan inspired by and adapted from a vintage lingerie knitting pattern from the 1940s. So if, like me, you quite like the look of vintage-inspired things, but also like me, vintage knitting patterns don't go up to my bust size, so I'm between a 47 and 50 inch bust, depending on time of the month. Generally, vintage knitting patterns aren't going to go up to that size for me. So something like this is really nice. I can get that vintage inspired piece. I love the colour that she's knit it in, this sort of creamy kind of off-white. I think is very reminiscent of vintage patterns, and it's really nice. So it's got sort of half length sleeves that are quite loose again, so would be nice and flowy. It is all over lace, and then it's got this sort of different lace around the ribbing at the bottom to act as ribbing, and then it doesn't have a button band, it has I-cords, and it has a tie in the middle, which I think looks absolutely gorgeous. I've seen people do it without the tie and wear it open as well, which looks equally nice. So the recommended yarn for this is actually a fingering weight yarn, and it's a 50% merino, 50% silk blend, so that still could be quite acceptable for summer in some places, but I think it would be quite doable to find an alternative. One of the testers actually used the same yarn as what I'm wearing here, which is Starcraft Naturals, which is I think it's 60% bamboo, 40% cotton blend. It's got an almost slightly nice sort of almost silky shiny sheen to it, and it's got a beautiful drape, and somebody had used that. This is really cost effective as well. It's something like £4 something a ball, and you get about 200 odd meters in that for that. It's really quite cost effective. So you could quite easily use a plant-based yarn in this, and I think you'd still get that beautiful drape and everything there. This has a gauge of, it's quite small needles, so it's 2.75mm recommended needles, and it's got a 27 stitch to 40 row gauge. Now, the other thing to note, I mentioned just then, I'm currently knitting the Milides dress by Vertnet. I'm knitting that in Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, and I'm knitting it on 2.75mm needles with that exact gauge. So it would also be doable in Pure Silk if you wanted to make something very, very luxurious. It comes in, as I mentioned, she's an incredibly size inclusive designer. She's just inclusive in general. I'm pretty certain she's a part of the LGBTQ plus community. If not, she's a very, very strong advocate for it. And she's, you know, a massive advocate of BIPOC in knitting, people of colour. you know, I just think she's an absolutely fantastic designer who is very strong in her convictions and happy to share them, and wants inclusivity and availability for everybody. So yeah, with that being said, she has full completely inclusive size range from a 30-inch full bust to a 66-inch full bust. It hasn't listed on there how much ease she recommends. Looking at the pattern pictures, I don't think it's much across the chest, although the sleeves are a little bit looser, but you could quite easily adjust this to how much or how little you want. And this recommends yardage. It's quite a yarn eater, again 2.75mm needles, you would kind of expect it to be, but it has a yardage recommendation of 1,184 meters to 2,368 meters of yarn. So it is quite a yarn eater. At the top end of that, if you were knitting it in Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, that would be 10 balls. Just, yeah, you'd have to get 10 balls to get that. So that's quite an expensive cardigan if you were knitting it in that. But like I say, things like this would be more like £40 if you were knitting in it in this yarn. So much more cost effective. The next one, if you like the look of that, but you don't want to knit it flat, or you want something a little bit more, I guess, modern looking with what we would call a normal cardigan setup of a raglan and some ribbing, I thought this one was lovely. This is the MORE Cardigan by Irene. This is a top-down cardigan with very similar lace pattern to the last one. However, this has a button band, so straight away it's got that difference there. It's got a ribbed hem around the bottom with a scalloped lace edge, which I think looks really, really lovely. It's not lace, sorry, a scalloped edge that looks really lovely. And it has these cables and eyelets down the raglan as well, which I think is really, really, really nice. This one is intended to be knit in Cardiff Cashmere Brushlight, which is a cashmere silk blend, which would be super luxurious, but maybe not very summer appropriate. Really sorry about the lighting. Let me just sit in the dark bit. But yeah, again, I didn't have to go very far to find somebody in the patterns that had knit this, in the project, sorry, that had knit this in a, what was it? I think it was Sandshore Lina. Which is a summer yarn that is a cotton, viscose and linen blend. Bamboo? Oh, I'm going to have to put the composition on screen because I can never remember. I've knit in it, it's lovely, it's really nice. And I noticed somebody lit it in that. And I think the thing that put me onto this one in the first place is I saw somebody on my Instagram who was working on it, and she was working on it. They were working on it in a 100% cotton yarn. So again, very, very easily transferable to a summer yarn. Like I said, DK weight yarn. 3.5mm needles with a gauge of 25 stitches and 31 rows, which is quite tight, particularly on the stitches for a DK weight yarn. But I think it would be, you know, it'd probably be okay because it's lace that you work in. It comes in sizes 1 to 8, which is a 35.5 inch to 60.5 inch bust circumference, and it recommends 2 inches of positive ease in that. It has short sleeve and long sleeve versions, and she recommends 690 meters to 1,656 meters of yarn. The one thing to note is that that is for the length that she recommends, which you can see on the pattern picture is fairly cropped. So if you wanted to add some length to that, if you wanted it to be a bit of a longer cardigan, you would need some more yardage than that. Okay, so the next one, sticking with the sort of lace and texture and cables theme, is called, inventively, the Lace and Cable Cardigan, and it's actually by Patons. This is going to get confusing. Patons. So Patons, I think, are a yarn manufacturer, and they obviously do patterns as well. Based in America. I could be getting all of this wrong. I don't see Patons very often over here in the UK, so I don't think they're UK based. And I think they used to do this as a kit. However, the yarn that they recommend for it is no longer available, so it's no longer a kit, but the pattern is actually free on their website. So if you wanted to have a go at something but didn't want to shell out for a pattern, this is a good one. This is actually recommended. Looking at this, I can hear you saying through the screen, that looks like a winter cardigan. I can completely see that. The yarn that they used for this and that they recommend, which obviously is discontinued, so you might be able to get it on Ravelry but isn't commercially available anymore, is a DK weight silk and bamboo blend. So it's 70% viscose from bamboo, 30% silk, so it's actually recommended to be knit in a summer yarn. Again, this is a DK weight summer yarn that I think would work really, really well as an alternative. And there's some other good ones. Again, Sandshore Lina. It doesn't have that shine that a silk would give, whereas this does a bit. But there are some really good. And I keep saying Sandshore Lina, but I should mention that Drop Spell is a complete dupe for that, as far as I'm aware. Certainly the composition is the same and it's cheaper. So that would be a good way to, you know, bring the cost down. This is, again, it's got as the name might suggest, it's got sort of vertical bands of lace and then some cables in between. It's a top-down raglan construction from what I can tell, and it has a gauge of 23 stitches and 30 rows on 3.75mm needles. I think this would be really, really fun to knit, and from what I can tell in the pattern, that button band is, oh, what do you call it? Is it contiguous? I can't remember what you call it, but basically it's integrated and you knit it as you go along from what I can tell in the pattern. This comes in a size range from extra small / small, so this is the one thing, is the sizing is good, but there isn't necessarily big gaps between the sizes, if that makes sense, because they do extra small to small, medium to large, that kind of thing. But extra small to small is a 37-inch finished bust, so that bottom end isn't great. But the top end is a 4 to 5 XL, which is a 64-inch finished bust. So again, really nice, inclusive. Quite often you find with, or I've certainly seen with patterns that are made by yarn companies, particularly patterns that have been made a long time ago by yarn companies, and this one I think was from like 2003, so we're talking 21 years ago at this point. They're not very inclusive. They stop at like a 40-50-inch bust. So really pleased to see that this one is. And it recommends 1,026 to 1,000, I can't read my own writing, 1,586 metres, I think that says, of yarn. But it gives you a rough idea of what you're going to be looking at. And I thought it didn't have a recommended ease on there, I don't think. But again, it looks like a fairly close fitting cardigan on the pictures. You would get a bit of growth from those summer yarns, so that would be something to bear in mind. The next one I wanted to mention, if you like the lace but you don't want an all over lace, we're moving a little bit more into the slightly more simple, classic, sophisticated patterns, and this is the Ochre cardigan by Ambah O'Brien. Sorry. This is a top-down raglan pattern with no button band again. It's got an I-cord edging, it's got very loose flowy sleeves, and it's got lace details, but it's just got them around the hem and around this bottom of the sleeves, and it's this lovely, quite modern looking chevron lace, she calls it. So it's not like really intricate, almost floral looking, which I know some people find a little bit maybe old fashioned sometimes. This is quite modern looking, and this is designed and knit in 100% linen fingering weight yarn. So again, intended to be knit in summer weight. I think she does say on Ravelry she has 2 samples, one of which is knit in 100% wool and one of which is knit in 100% linen, to show you the difference that you can get between those two. So if you did want a winter one or a more transitional one, I guess you could knit it in a wool. But it has been knit in linen in one of the samples. I haven't knit with pure linen myself. I have heard it's quite hard on your hands, so I know it's not for everybody, but maybe you could use a fingering weight cotton or a fingering weight, some sort of fingering weight summer blend. Again, Sanders Garn Tin Lena this time is a summer blend that is fingering weight that you could probably use for that. And then there's things like Knitting for Olive Pure Silk. I've mentioned before the Fantasy Yarns Cotton Bamboo blend, which is a light fingering and again would probably work quite well for this. This is quite an open gauge, so it's knit on 3.75mm needles for fingering weight yarn. That's quite big, and it's 20 stitches and 33 rows in stockinette, and then I think it's the same gauge in your chevron lace as well. It comes in sizes of 30 inches to 60 inches finished bust, and bust measurement, not finished bust, and it recommends 6 inches of positive ease. So with that ease, that should in theory go up to a 66 inch finished bust. So quite a lot of variation there in the sizes, and you could probably get, you know, if you were a little bit bigger than that, you could probably get a decent fitting thing that still has some ease. This uses recommended amounts of 599 meters to 1,596 meters of yarn. And like I said, really beautiful. I think quite simple and understated, but still very classy and very sophisticated, and I think this would look really nice over a lot of things. I could imagine this as like a cover over for, like, this is a really weird scenario, but I can imagine my mum wearing something like this coming to our wedding or coming to a party or something as a cover up my arms. I don't want to show my arms off, and also I want to be warm. I can completely imagine someone wearing it in those kind of circumstances, or just a beach cover up, or, you know, it's lovely. Okay, so the next one is actually also knit in 100% linen, although this one is Aran weight linen. So this is the Sandshore by Alicia Plummer. This is a seamless top-down cardigan. Like I said, it's knit in a much heavier weight. It's knit in an Aran weight yarn. But this is it has this sort of mesh lace, she calls it, pattern. It's got eyelets down the raglan, which I think look really beautiful. I really love when people do that. And then it's got this mesh lace, and you have a horizontal band that goes sort of around your waist, and then it has a vertical band that goes down the back, but she's offset it to make it look a bit asymmetrical and a little bit more modern. I don't know if I like it like that better, or if I would like if it was in the centre better, but I do think it looks lovely either way. And I think I can imagine this over little t-shirt and shorts at the beach. It gets a bit cold, you chuck this on, perfect. And do you know what, part of that I think is because she styled it as a beach cover up in the photos, so clearly that worked. But yeah, this is knit in an Aran weight linen. I can't remember I think it was Kestrel, Quinton Co Kestrel, the recommended yarn she'd put in there. It's not a brand I'm familiar with, although I have heard of, and I think it's again something that's more accessible in America, but I will put it on screen, the recommended yarn. But this has 16 stitches and 20 rows on 6.5mm needles. So whilst this is a fairly big cardigan, I can imagine this flying off the needles. I think this would knit up really, really quickly. And again, it has 31 inches to 67 inches in the sizing, and that recommends 486 to 764 meters of yarn. So it's quite a low yardage cardigan as well. And I think that's probably a lot of that is to do with the mesh panels as well. The next one I wanted to talk about is very similar kind of use case to the last one. It's a big open cardigan. Oh, I should have mentioned, sorry, on the Sandshore, it has a button band, but it doesn't have buttons. It's intended to be worn open. The next one, sorry, is the Beachy Breezy Cardi by Knitting Tipsy. Now I think it's knitted by Whitney, talks about Knitting Tipsy a lot, and I wanted to try some of her patterns for a bit, and I just haven't come around to it, but this is one that I think would make itself onto my to be knit list very, very quickly. So Chelsea's patterns, generally, she does some knit patterns, she does some crochet patterns, they're very beachy. She's got some really sort of beautiful, summery, fun, colourful designs, and this is absolutely no exception. So the idea of this is that it's a very loose, flowy, drapey, oversized throw-on piece for when it's cold at the end of the day when you've been at the beach. She knits this in lace weight yarn. It's lace weight Suri silk, Suri alpaca silk, so I'm not entirely sure if I would knit it in that. However, one of the projects on Ravelry has, there's a couple I think, but they've knit it in a lace weight cotton, I think, or like I said, the cotton bamboo from Fantasy Yarns is a light fingering, and I think that would work quite well. And it looks really, really good in that as well. It looks great in the Suri alpaca like Chelsea's done, but it also looks great in this, and she'd just done it in a solid black, I think fingering weight cotton, and it made a beautiful, beautiful garment. So you still could do this in plant yarns, and it is intended to be a summer garment. It's knit on big needles, so lace weight yarn on 5mm needles with a 15 stitch and 23 row gauge in knit one purl one ribbon, which I think is what the texture is over the whole thing, to give it a bit of structure, because otherwise you just have a very loose piece of fabric. But yeah, it's knit at this big airy gauge to make it this really sort of throw over piece. Chelsea's sample hits probably just below her waist, and the sleeves go about 3/4 of the way down, but she says you can adjust it as much as you like. And the idea is that it's all very loose and very flowy, and I just think this looks stunning, absolutely stunning. I love the way she styled it in the photos over that gorgeous red dress, but yeah, I think this is a really versatile cardigan. This comes in a size range from a 28 inch to a 62 inch bust, and it recommends 8 to 10 inches of positive ease. Again, very oversized, very flowy, and it's actually quite light on the yarn, again because it's such a open cardigan. So it recommends 559 to 1052 meters of yarn. So if you were doing it in Suri, for quite a lot of the sizes, you could probably actually get that out of 2 balls of hand-dyed Suri, 2 skeins of hand-dyed Suri, because they usually, if you get a good yardage one, they're usually around 400, 420 meters. So that's definitely worth having a look at. The last one I want to talk about has a little bit of a caveat to it. So this is technically called a summer top. Stay with me. So it's technically called a summer top. It looks very much like a cardigan or a top. You could wear it as either. I can completely see you could wear it as either. And the designer has clearly acknowledged that, because on Ravelry she's listed it under tops and tees. She's also listed it under sweaters and cardigans, and she calls it a cardigan style top. So it's a bit of a crossover. And when you look through the patterns, because there's quite a lot of projects, because quite a lot of people have made this. A lot of people have worn it as a summer shirt, and I think it looks really nice like that, but you do see some people wearing it open as a cardigan, and I think that looks really, really good too. And I wanted to include it because it's on my to be knit list. I came across it when I was looking for summer tops a little while ago, and I just think it's really, really pretty. So this is the Umbria Summer Top by Cookie the Knitter. And this is, like I say, cardigan style top is what she calls it. It is a top down, I think it's raglan construction, it's broken rib, I think, from what I can see on the pictures. It's a broken rib texture, and it's designed to be knitted in Knitting for Olive pure silk, and I just think it's stunning. I can completely see wearing this with shorts for summer, or over a little camisole and some shorts. And I just think, yeah, open or closed, this looks absolutely gorgeous. And I've said a few times through this, knitting for Olive Pure Silk is not the most cost effective. It is cheaper if you get it from Knitting for Olive themselves directly generally, although you might get customs on that. However, it is still not a budget yarn. There is no way that that's a budget yarn. I test knit earlier in the year the Reveries tee for Hannah of Herb Garden Knitwear, and that was recommended to be knit in Knitting for Olive Pure Silk. And I found the Fantasy Yarns cotton and bamboo blend. I think it is only UK available. I don't think they post internationally, unfortunately. But that is a 50% cotton, 50% bamboo yarn. And it was way more cost effective than the Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, and I got exactly the same gauge as. It still had that sort of luster, the same drape. It's beautiful. I really love it. So that I think would also work well with this. So yeah, this is recommended to be knit in Knitting for Olive Pure Silk. It's quite a big needle size for that. So like I said, for my dress, I've had to go down to a 2.75mm needle. This is on 3.5mm needles with a 24 stitch and 34 row gauge. Knowing my gauge on it, I think I would probably be on a 3 to do this. So I would definitely say with Pure Silk, swatch, block it, check it, and check it again once you've started, because I found that once I'd started actually knitting with it, my gauge changed quite a lot. This comes in a size range from 2XS to 5XL, which is a 32 3/4 inch to 59 inch bust circumference. So it's not quite at that 60 inch bust circumference. However, that's a bust circumference, not a finished bust circumference. So that's your measurement. And it recommends 0.75 to 4 inches of positive ease. So that positive ease on top takes it over 60 inches. So I thought I'd still put it in. This one recommends 750 to 1,500 meters of yarn. Now, the one thing I will note is it's one of those patterns where it doesn't actually tell you a yardage. It tells you a number of balls of Knitting for Olive Pure Silk you should need for each size. So there is entirely, and I think for the lowest size it was 3 balls. For the biggest size it was 6 balls, I think. But yeah, the reason I mention that is because there is a bit of a caveat there, isn't there, that she's just done numbers of balls. You might only just break into that last ball, or you might need all of that. So if you want to add extra length, you might need another ball, and that makes it a bit more difficult. I would hope that in the pattern itself it has a bit more information about actual yardages, not just numbers of balls, but I haven't bought it myself yet, so I'm not 100% sure on that. So yeah, that was all the patterns I wanted to talk about to you today. One thing I would mention is, looking through this, is, do you know what, honestly, when I was doing my cardigan pattern roundup, it was a little bit difficult anyway to find some that were, there were a lot that weren't size inclusive, and then when it came to looking at summer cardigans, plant-based cardigans, things that were intended to be those sort of properly transitional pieces, I went through so many that looked good, that looked really good, that looked really interesting. And then I clicked in them and they weren't size inclusive. And some of them weren't even like not size inclusive. They were, I couldn't knit them. I'm currently sitting at about a 47-inch bust, which is not, I'm not saying I'm small, but I'm not that big. I'm not that big. I feel like the UK average dress size is a 16. And on the top, I'm about an 18 to a 20. So I'm just above average. And I couldn't fit in some of these. So if you are somebody who has tendencies towards being a designer, or you're designing already, yeah, there's a gap here. There's a gap here. And I would say I really liked what the Ambah Brown cardigan did, where she had 2 samples, one in a plant-based yarn and one in a wool. So you could see how it worked in both. I think, you know, a lot of cardigans out there would be possible to substitute in a plant-based yarn, but I appreciate not everybody feels comfortable enough to do that. Let me know if it would be of interest at some point to talk about. I've never been somebody who's particularly phased by, do you know what, I say that. Initially I wanted to use the recommended yarn in the pattern because I didn't understand how I could possibly substitute. Once I worked out that it was that I could do it, I've been fairly liberal with it since. I very rarely knit in the recommended yarn in a pattern, particularly if it's something quite expensive, because I just don't want to spend that much on my knitting. I would rather knit more than less. So I tend to use budget fibres so I can do that. And I'm not somebody who, in terms of substitution, will look for a direct substitute. I will look for things that I'll knit in acrylic if that's what's going to work best for me. I will knit in cotton if that's what works best for me, even if the pattern recommends wool or silk or whatever. I am not going to sit there and necessarily go, oh, it has to have this exact same composition. I'll look at what traits do I want in the fibre at the end. Do I want it to be drapey? Do I want it to be quite structured? What do I want? Do I want stitch definition? But yeah, let me know if that would be interesting to talk about that, because I think it is something that can be quite daunting and quite difficult, and I think there's a bit of a, not a stigma around it, that's not what I mean, but I think there's quite a bit of fear around it, and some people can be quite, what's the word I want to use that doesn't sound offensive? Maybe a bit anal about it, actually. A little bit anal about it, we're just going to go for it. And say, oh, you must use this kind of fibre, you must use that. And I think, do you know what, use what fibre works for you, and I absolutely will. I will vary massively. But yeah, let me know if that would be interesting to talk about that, because I'd be happy to try and demystify that a little bit if I can. But yeah, anyway, my rant over there. My rant absolutely over. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found some inspiration. Let me know down below if you're knitting for autumn cardigans from my last video, or if you're knitting summer cardigans still. And yeah, let me know if there's any that I've missed, because like I said, there weren't many, and by the time there weren't massive amounts, and by the time I got towards the end of having got enough that I haven't got the ones that I wanted to talk about, I was getting quite frustrated by the lack of size inclusivity in them. So yeah, I hope you found some inspiration, and if you've got any other patterns and designers that you would recommend for this kind of thing, please feel free to let me know, because I would always love to discover new things. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. It really helps me out, and I really love seeing it. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as you seem to have enjoyed the last one. And hopefully I'll see you back in a couple of days' time with another podcast episode. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Have a great day wherever you are, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.